that actually happened in what is now the town of Lexington, called Terror Springs. The Loyalist militia stole cattle, took it to the springs to rest and allow the cattle to drink. Were surprised by a Patriot militia. Shots were fired. Negotiations began, and the Loyalist militia said, if we give you back the cattle, will you let us go?
You are listening to Historyman, the platform for historians, curators, and authors to tell their stories of the American Revolution, walk in the footsteps of heroes, and proclaim freedom reigns. On today's episode, we are with JR Fennell of the Lexington County Museum here in South Carolina. Welcome, JR.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
JR, we are in this beautiful part of the state just west of Columbia, which is the capital of South Carolina. For our people who are listening outside of South Carolina, don't really have a frame of reference. Lexington traces its heritage back to the German immigrants that came into South Carolina and got land grants. The government positioned this community as kind of a bulwark against the Indians further north and northwest of here. But y'all have got quite the museum here, and it's not a museum that's confined to one particular building. Y'all have brought in quite a number of buildings. Tell our listeners some of the projects you have and the kind of the layout of this particular museum, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. We, one of the things that kind of makes me laugh a little bit is we'll take people on a tour of our many structures. We've got 30 historic structures on 6 acres. And, even after an hour and a half tour, they'll say, well, where's the museum? Yeah, because they think of a one building kind of place.
Well, each building has its own history within that. Some of the original buildings that really predate the founding of America, I think, in some respects. Yes? How far back do they go?
Yeah, so, we've got 3 18th century structures. At least 2 of them predate the American Revolution. We only have kind of an exact date for one of them. That's thanks to some tree ring dating, some dendrochronology that we're able to do in the Lawrence Corley Log House, and that dates from, we know specifically, to 1771. And so we say it's the oldest building on the property.
And it's a fabulous tour. It's something that kind of, like you said, it kind of takes you aback because everybody's looking for a museum, and each building is another museum set with another set of facts and stories that go along with that building. Some of these buildings are actually from some of the bigger names in Lexington County in South Carolina during the Revolutionary War, yes?
Absolutely, yeah. So
Corley is huge. That name is huge in this part of the country.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The house that is across from the museum, was the Fox House? Or
That's right, yeah. So we've got the Fox House that's on the museum property, and that is the original house the museum started off with, built about 1832, like I said, is what the museum started off with, but antebellum house purchased by a man named John Fox in 1843. Prominent, he was a farmer, merchant, that sort of stuff. Had his hands in everything. Politician, he was sheriff, clerk of court, state senator, state representative. I mean, any kind of political office you can hold, he held. So, just very well connected.
I ran into some of your people from the museum at the Shot Heard Round the World festivities that your group sponsored here in Lexington. Tell us a little bit about that, and then how that is kind of a stepping stone for you in the celebrations coming up.
Yeah, so we, of course, like the rest of the state, Lexington County created a 250th Commission to try to celebrate and commemorate the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. So we got going, and, several of us had an idea that, since Lexington County and then the town of Lexington, got its name from the Battle of Lexington and Concord that kicked off the American Revolution, we thought it'd be a fantastic idea to have a celebration here in the community to celebrate that battle and also kind of serve as a kickoff party for the 250th itself and let people know that we exist and that we're doing some great work and we'll continue to have some celebrations, commemorations, and we'll have some upcoming projects as well. So
Lexington County itself, can you talk a little bit about the history of the county, how it developed as a actual bona fide county as opposed to a district? What was the district and how did it become a county, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so, you mentioned before, not to go way too in-depth with this, but basically, the devastating Yamasee War occurs 1715, and the Yamasee are driven pretty much to Spanish Florida by 1718, but it, kind of damages the colony, not only physically, but mentally, and so they wanted to create some kind of buffer between the Cherokee, even though they were trading partners with the Cherokee after the Yamasee War, and the Creek. You had still had the French, so they wanted some kind of buffer. And a lot of the land in the backcountry that had been occupied by Indians before the war, it was pretty much vacant afterwards. And so a governor named Robert Johnson came up with the idea of creating townships, surveying it, and offering land to immigrants if they paid their own way to put in the backcountry, and that way, if the Cherokee, the Creek, or whoever attacked, they would kind of absorb the blow a little bit, and so they created a township here in 1733 called the Congarees, renamed 1736 Saxe-Gotha after Princess Augusta of Saxe-Gotha, German princess married into the English royal family. So they started to attract at first German-speaking Swiss, and then in the 1750s is when you had that kind of what we would consider to be German migration coming over. And like you said, a lot of those big family names that are still out there today, the Corleys, the Harmons, the Sheeleys. So they started to settle. So many of them started to settle in between the Broad and the Saluda rivers, and that kind of fork became known as Deutsch Fork. Gets corrupted to Dutch, and that's how we ended up with Dutch Fork today, despite the fact no Dutch people were there in the colonial period.
Well, some of the oldest churches are actually Lutheran churches.
That's exactly right.
So, and you talk about the Swedish, German-speaking Swedish. We did have Swedish hamlets throughout South Carolina going over towards the Savannah River as well, right?
That's right. Perrysburg, was that Swiss kind of thing. And, it's kind of interesting. I read a very good book about Perrysburg, and they were split between French-speaking and German-speaking, and so the this author of this book was saying the Germans speaking people there had a very hard time finding a minister who could speak both French and German. So apparently they just kept getting French speakers, so they were feeling left out.
That's interesting. So tell me a little bit about some of the Revolutionary War history in this part. This was, what was the district here at that time? The Saxe-Gotha district.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that history, the Revolutionary War history.
Yeah, so, this is maybe a little bit of an oversimplification, but you had, kind of going before the Revolution, you had of course, the French and Indian War, the Cherokee War, that was the southern part of that. And growing out of that, you had kind of a volatile time period there in the 1760s where you had a lack of law enforcement. There was no real law enforcement in the area. Justices of the peace, of course, but they had very limited power and really only came around every once in a while. You had landless people that were driven off their land because of the Cherokee attacks. And you had bandits. And so this kind of, these factors kind of led to a situation where a vigilante group called the Regulators sprang up, and vigilante groups often get out of hand, and so you had a group called the Moderators spring up to oppose them, and so anyway, you see those divisions. Even though they were able to get a little more political power, they were able to get circuit courts in the area. Some of those divisions apparently continued into the Revolutionary period, where you had a lot of the Moderators apparently became loyalists later on, and the Regulators became patriots, but at first, the people in this area wanted to be left alone. They did not want to participate in the revolution. They just kind of wanted to live their lives. Also, their land grants were, of course, signed by the King of England, and they didn't want to lose their land, if not their life. And in some cases, the people hated the colonial government in Charleston much more than they, felt any kind of animosity towards the government across the ocean. So when the war first breaks out, they had a difficult time trying to convince the people here to really join in. And it wasn't until later on that you see some of the kind of excesses by Bloody Bill Cunningham, some of these other folks that, they start to really kind of join the patriot cause.
What was the center of government during that time I'm saying Lexington County because you are the Lexington County Museum, but was this the center of government in that Saxacatha district, or was it as far north as 96, or was it down in Augusta? Where was the center of power during the time of the Revolution in this district? Yeah,
so, the only kind of major community of any sort really was Granby. And Granby, was on the Congaree. It was not, I think, a kind of a center of government. I believe that really to do anything, especially before the regulator movement, you had to go to Charleston for everything. Yeah, and so registered deeds, if you wanted to buy land, that's where you would go, and serve on juries. But Granby was the only kind of community of any size, and they got a courthouse after after independence that they then moved from Granby because there were too many quote unquote frivolous lawsuits, and so they moved the courthouse down to Orangeburg, which we were part of Orangeburg District at the time, and then in 1804. Lexington became a full-fledged district again, and so they were able to get a courthouse and jail back.
Well, it causes me to, we spoke about this before we started recording. It causes me to think when Drayton and William Tennant and I believe one other minister came into the backcountry looking for people to sign on to the revolutionary process. They came into the backcountry and they said they came into the Saxacatha district and got a lot of pushback. They got pushback from the Cunninghams. They got a pushback from Fletchall. The Cunninghams and Fletchall were, my understanding, is up closer to 96. Where would they have come? Do we know where they would have come in this area?
I don't know exactly where they came, to be honest, but my assumption would be Granby. I think that would be the only kind of area that, a community of any size, like I said, and so, it gets developed about 1760-ish.
Kind of makes sense because there were 3 pre-revolutionary forts there at Granby. The Congarees, Fort 1, 2, and I know there was at least 2.
Yeah.
We did a episode with the director down there at that museum. Did a great job in explaining where the forts were and some of their research on that. In Lexington County proper now, if you go to Jack Parker's book, he talks about several Revolutionary War battles that occurred here in Lexington County. What would some of those be?
Yeah, so mostly, skirmishes and smaller battles. A lot of them, almost all of them took place in 1781. And you had several that occurred during, I think, the siege of 96. And so you had, of course, reinforcements that were trying to go to relieve the Loyalists and the British there. And so you had some harassment of those forces by Patriot militia units here. And so pretty much the biggest one happened in May 1781, and that's when it was the second attempt to capture Fort Granby, as it was called. Fortified house. The Casey Museum is kind of supposed to be a replica of that. At first the siege was led by Thomas Sumter. He then left. It was taken over by Light Horse Harry Lee. From what I understand, the sides negotiated, and the troops inside said, "We will surrender the fort if you allowed us to keep the booty that we stole from some of the local landowners." So,
from what I understand, some of the Sumter's troops actually saw their furniture going by in the wagons that the British were taking off, and they got incensed at Light Horse Harry Lee for doing this.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
And I can see why they would, because they were actually, keeping watch on that fort. Sumter had left and gone down to Orangeburg, but he left some men behind. And then Light Horse Harry Lee comes in after they capture Fort Mott. Okay, I'll take over. And then all of a sudden, boom, all their stuff that they were fighting for got taken off by the British. But there are some other battles. Is Juniper Springs part of Lexington County?
Absolutely, yeah. It takes place, just outside the modern-day town of Gilbert. And again, that's one of those where you had reinforcements heading towards 96, and there's an engagement there with some of the Patriot militia units, and I think led by Philemon Waters. So, pretty important battle, actually. Mm-hmm.
I've read a little bit about that, and it was like Sumter's troops were mounted, but they didn't have any swords. And, and they got attacked by a bunch of Tories that did have swords, and they suffered tremendously. I went down to and I don't know if it's in Lexington or Orangeburg County, but I went down and found some graves out in the middle of a cornfield. Mm-hmm. And I believe that was I think it was in Lexington, but it was out in a rural part of Lexington County. Mm-hmm. And it was just... And it was tied to another running battle or something, and some guys got hung, and it's just field stones. There's no gravestones saying who these people are. It's just field stones, and the owner of that property has maintained that grave for years and years, that grave site for years and years. Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there's one that's down on Cedar Creek in the southern part of Lexington County, and then there's one that I've been to called Vaudance Oldfield, and we think that it probably was Van Sant's, in a worn-out field. But like you're saying, it was kind of as the aftermath of another small skirmish that actually happened in what is now the town of Lexington, called Terror Springs. The Loyalist militia stole cattle, took it to the springs to rest and allow the cattle to drink. Were surprised by a Patriot militia. Shots were fired. Negotiations began, and the Loyalist militia said, "If we give you back the cattle, will you let us go?" And they agreed to those terms, went their separate ways. The Patriot militia went to the west, went to a small area off of Lick Creek, which is a tributary to Clouds Creek. And this is in November 1781. And while there, they were surprised by Bloody Bill Cunningham. They tried to hide in a log house, a small log house that was there, and tried to negotiate to surrender. But unfortunately, Bloody Bill had other ideas and earned his nickname, and massacred about 20 men, I believe it was. Yeah.
It is interesting, that whole Bloody Bill campaign, until I started getting into that, into the history of South Carolina the last few years. I never knew anything about that. I mean, we weren't taught that in school, even when South Carolina history was required part of your formal education coming through middle school. We weren't. I don't remember anything like that. And especially, I was from the upstate, so I learned some local history from the upstate. But this kind of stuff you don't hear. That was a big pushback when Bloody Bill made his Bloody Scout. That was like he was taking retribution against a lot of the problems that he had, and a lot of the losses that they suffered as a result of the Revolutionary War. Mm-hmm. And they did have to pick one side or the other, or certainly he did. He was a patriot at first and got into a little row with his supervisors or his senior officers, and then he became a British loyalist, and he certainly was a bad guy. He really was. But okay, so Tarpon Springs, is that the one right behind the school district offices and stuff?
Absolutely, that's it. Yeah, and so
you've got a plaque or something that memorializes that particular place, right?
Mm-hmm. We do, yeah. So the local Sons of the American Revolution actually sponsored that and had it installed. But that's one of the 250th Commission in Lexington. Like a lot of other counties, that's one of the things that we're trying to do is to have more historic markers. We were fortunate to get some grants from the statewide commission, and so we're working on several historic markers as we speak, and trying to get those memorialize those places.
So we've got another one at right near River Bluff High School, another battle skirmish incident that happened right there. What do you know about that?
Yeah, so that's it was Dreer's Fort, it was called, and a lot of these places, a lot of your listeners probably know, but these forts that were here in the backcountry, I mean, they were not these large installations. They were most of the time just houses with a palisade wall around it, and so this was it was owned by Godfrey Dreer. And British soldiers came. He had given supplies, foodstuffs, provisions to the Patriot Army, and his son had served in the Patriot militia, and so they came to, I believe, try to capture him. And from what I understand, the few people inside made enough noise that where everybody they thought that it was a huge army inside. They thought it was multiple, many men. And so they ran away from it, retreated, because they thought there was many more men than there actually were. So.
Did they actually shoot some? Did they actually gain entry to the house?
I don't remember. I've read about it, but there's some of these things are so kind of shrouded in myth and legend that it's hard to tell what's fact and what's fiction. Yeah.
What would you want people to take away from their visit to Lexington County?
One thing, and this is just kind of a personal thing, I guess, but that Lexington County has its own unique history. A lot of growth is occurring in Lexington County. A lot of people are moving here, and a lot of it's good, but we have been for a while now a suburb of Columbia, and so people kind of think of it as having no history, but it's got years and years of its own unique history. I mean, this kind of German influence has a fascinating effect on the area, and just the people that lived and fought and everything else here before the kind of coming of the interstate. I mean, it's just fascinating, I think. And so if people take one thing away, it's just that it's not just a Columbia suburb, it's its own history.
So other than the churches, the older churches, what are some of the influences that have survived?
A lot of the kind of German culture and all is faded away over the years, but there's really kind of two things that have survived the test of time, and one is that you read about the people that settled here and their descendants, and they are constantly referred to as thrifty, and they're constantly referred to as superstitious. You read about the people here, and they believed in witches, they believed in hexes, ghosts. They thought you could be cursed. They believed that you could protect yourself in certain ways from being.
This is coming from the old German old country,
absolutely,
Eastern Europe, that sort of thing.
Yeah, because you see this.
That's what is that? Hansel and Gretel and Brothers Grimm, that sort of thing. It's dark.
Yeah.
Dark stories.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And then Disney modifies it, makes it much
certainly
more.
Disney has modified that.
Yeah.
They were very dark stories.
Exactly.
If you go back to the original. So.
But yeah, you're right. And so you see this in a lot of places where Germans settle. So here in Lexington and other places too. I know I've read about it in North Dakota. I've read about it in other places in the Midwest. You had what was called using, which is a translation of the German word brauchen. And this using was kind of a combination of faith healing and magic. Users could talk fire out of burns. They could heal headaches, toothaches, swelling, different things like that. And you see some of this in Pennsylvania Dutch country too. They call it powwow there, but you have these practitioners, and that's something that still survives to this day. There are people that practice using, that believe in it wholeheartedly, and I've met several of them, and I've met plenty of others who claim to have been healed by them, and or at least had relatives that practiced it. A gentleman told me one time that when he was young, his he had a wart on his thumb or something to that effect, and he talked to his father about it, and his father said, go see your uncle, and he'll take care of it. And so apparently his uncle kind of rubbed it and said some kind of incantation, and he said the uncle told him, now go to bed, and when you wake up it'll be gone. And so he said he did as he was told, and when he woke up he had 2 more warts on his thumb. And so he said he wasn't sure whether his uncle was not very good or whether he didn't like him and had cursed him. So
well, it's interesting. I know that when you look back on history, and people who just get into history, they think, well, all these medicines were something that people picked up from Native Americans when they came in and started settling into the backcountry of South Carolina, and that's just not necessarily true. These people have brought those medicinal herbs and knowledge from the old country, whether it be Ireland, Scotland, Germany, or wherever, France and that sort of thing. So they are bringing some of those things here. They may not have the plants that they had in the old country, but certainly they brought some of those plants with them and transplanted and tried to transplant them here in the States, or the new country as it was back then. So I asked this question, or try to ask this question of all my guests. I want to spend a little bit of time on this with you. What does liberty mean to JR?
Well, I think as a historian, you kind of have to look at it the way, I think that they looked at it at the time. And I think, again, no taxation without representation, to have this right to life, liberty, and property, the pursuit of happiness. And so, I think just to... really have an opportunity to live a comfortable life if you want to work hard and try not to do anything that hurts anybody else, hopefully. So that's kind of what it means to me, I think.
That's a good definition for yourself. I think it's actually rooted into a lot of the history that we're talking about here. What are some of the pet projects or things that you wanted to illuminate our listeners to here in Lexington? Yeah,
so of course we've got the work with the 250th Commission that is continuing and is going to continue up until 2035. And so we'll of course have more events. We're going to have more historic markers, and hopefully we'll have some good projects that we can report on to the public. Besides that, here at the museum, we are working on several things. We always have, seems like restoration projects going on with the 30 historic structures that we have. A lot of them need some kind of maintenance every now and then, and so that's a constant kind of ongoing thing that we have. And fortunately, the County of Lexington is able to help us out with that. We also have a nonprofit group that helps us raise funds to help pay for these restoration costs. And we are currently working on a project trying to create a database/index of all the enslaved people that we can find named in the records of Lexington County. And so basically trying to create biographical sketches of these people, and then to try to match them with people listed in the 1870 census, the first census that actually had black people enumerated and named, because really what we're seeing is that we have a lot of African American citizens who are interested in genealogy, and sometimes reach a dead end, and so we try to help them out as much as possible. We've also been able to make connections and try to get a more complete view of what life was like in the antebellum period here in Lexington County. We've been able to. I'm working right now on trying to find more about. There was in the 1860 census, there was actually a black lady who was listed as a slave owner, and so I'm trying to research her family. It turns out that I think the people that she was listed as owning were her family, and they later became loggers and owned several sawmills. So it's very interesting. This is all up in the Dutch Fork area. But trying to find out more about that, my employee Paul Stetzel, he's a genealogist and has done a great job at creating this database.
Y'all have a section in the museum in one of the buildings that is dedicated to that kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And it has some records in there, right? That's interesting. So the census didn't come out till 1870, after the Civil War. That's
where the first census where black people were, so before that, let me start over. So before that, the slaves were the slave owners were listed in the number of slaves they had with their ages sometimes, but for the most part they were not named, and so it wasn't until 1870 that everybody was listed in the census and named. So it. You did have free, people of color who were listed in the census as if they were, free, and especially if they were, considered the head of the household. But
right.
But it wasn't until 1870 that you see everybody listed.
Do you have any free people of color that were actually tied to the Revolutionary War?
So that's something we're also trying to work on as well, to try to see, besides the kind of families and people that we know of, were any, people of color, Indians, black people, were they involved in any way, shape, or form here in Lexington? And that's something that, I'm currently trying to research as well. We do know that after the Clouds Creek Massacre that there were slaves who helped to bury the bodies and were involved in that way. But
what is something that's coming that comes up every year that you'd love for people to be involved in, and how would they get a hold of you and get a hold of the museum?
So coming up, I don't know if this podcast will reach anybody by then, but May 4th, we are going to have our spring open house. That's something we do every year from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. And we have many of the buildings open that people can tour on their own. It's a free event, and at this event we try to focus on historic crafts. So we have a blacksmith on site, soap making demonstration, a basket weaver, a cooking demonstration. A lot of the crafts, we've had pewter casting before. A lot of these crafts that don't exist anymore, and so to try to teach people more about what life was like in the 18th and 19th centuries, we after that we are going to host at some point. Got to get with the town of Lexington and some of the other communities. We do murders and mysteries tours, we call them, and so these are tours that we have downtown Lexington, downtown West Columbia, and the Irmo Town Park. And we try to tell some of the kind of crazy stories that occurred in those communities. These are some of the murders, the duels, the lynchings that occurred, sometimes stories that are swept under the rug, and also talk about the history of the communities and some of the historic structures that are around as well. But that's what we got coming up in the next few months here.
How would they get a hold of you?
So you can go to lexingtoncountymuseum.org. That is our website. Great way to keep up with what's going on. We have a email newsletter that we send out every other month. You can sign up on the website if you'd like to receive it. My email address, you can send it to museum@lexingtoncounty.sc.gov. And we also have, of course, a telephone number, 803-359-8369. And we'd be happy to hear from you. We hope to see you out at the museum, and keep up with us on. We're on Facebook as well, Lexington County Museum. I believe it's facebook.com/Lexington County Museum. We're on Instagram. Our handle is LexCo Museum, I believe. So great ways to keep in touch. We try to post interesting things on Facebook, new artifact acquisitions. Of course, information about events coming up. Kind of cool newspaper articles we find, that sort of stuff. But we'd love to hear from you and love to have you come visit.
Thank you so much, JR.
Thank you.